Most of you are probably familiar, really familiar, with the story of the Lion King. So a little refresher, Simba is the young, arrogant prince who flees. He leaves his homeland because he mistakenly believes that he is responsible for his father's death. And I think the story of Lion King, well, essentially, the whole story is about how Simba can get back home, right? It's how Simba can take his rightful place in the kingdom. But it raises an interesting set of questions for us. And one question that I find particularly interesting is, what are the things that cause you to run away? Now, most of you also know that I recently returned from a trip to Africa, Kenya, which is in East Africa, and we were particularly in this place called Rusinga Island. Rusinga Island is a 9-hour van ride from the capital city of Nairobi, and here's a little bit of context on Rusinga Island. This is a community of about 20,000 people. It is a community marked by poverty and death and dying and disease and illness. Children in Rusinga Island are still dying of malaria. Government officials tell us that about a quarter of the people are living with HIV/AIDS, which in Rusinga Island is a death sentence. And local leaders tell us that that number is actually much higher, that it's well over half of the people living with HIV/AIDS. And I just want to share with you this morning some of the gifts that I experienced along the journey. And I'm also reminded that most of the good things in life, the best kinds of gifts in life, come with a little bit of pain, don't they? One of the best things about this trip was my mom joined us on this trip, and she absolutely loved it. Now, when we were in Africa, we did lots of things. We went with a friend of mine named Darren, and Darren is the leader of this organization called Project Humanity. And Project Humanity is involved in a few different areas. They do micro grants and small business education, women's empowerment, and they work in these young girls' schools. And they're also in hospitals and clinics, working with new moms and new babies. So the primary reason I was invited to Kenya was to lead storyline groups, the same storyline groups that we have been doing here at St. Luke's for the past year. And so I want to talk for just a minute about what happened in these storyline groups, particularly my group. And so we boiled it down. Storyline is 8 sessions. We condensed it into 4 sessions, and we met on that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And my mom was leading my group with me. We had a group of about 15 to 20 people made up of primarily women. And here's how it started. We met on that Monday afternoon, and I explained a little bit about the importance of story and how our lives are like stories, and we each have this unique story with positive turns, like the good things, the joys, and the celebrations, but we also, in each of our stories, we have these negative turns, the pains, the tragedies, the sufferings. And I talked a little bit about the importance of redeeming the negative turns, right? Doing something meaningful with the pain that we've experienced. And then I threw it to my mom, and she shared her story, and here's how the rest of the afternoon went. We heard from 3 others. That's all we had time for. The first woman shared. She said that her husband was a raging alcoholic and wasn't really present. Last year, their home burned down and everything in it burned. She was really grateful, though, that they had found a new place to live, but still her greatest hope was that her children would one day experience a bed as they were still sleeping on the dirt floor. And then a second person shared, young, probably early 30s, and she began by saying that she was a widow, which is a common story in Rusinga Island because men don't live very long. Most of them die from disease, sickness, HIV/AIDS. She said that she was a widow, and she talked about the pain and struggle of raising her boys on her own in poverty. And one of her greatest joys was that her boys were finally to the age to where they could help out in her small business, where she owns this little roadside shop where she sells shoes and brooms and other items. And then the third woman shared, and she started like this. I grew up on the streets of Kenya as an orphan because my mom was addicted to the drink. I'm a widow, and she was young too, probably early 30s. She says, I'm a widow, and I'm the mother of 5, but I've already buried 3 of my children. And I have this disease that stays with me and affects me every single day. And we could only assume she was talking about AIDS. And she just stops. No tears, no embracing of one another. And we were getting ready to move on, but I just paused the group because in our context here, when we do groups like this and when that kind of story is shared, if you share that you've lost 3 of your 5 children, we would probably be sharing tears together and embracing one another. And so I asked Mildred, I said, Mildred, if it's okay for me to ask, how did you lose 3 of your 5 children? And she said, well, the first one died at the local swimming hole. We couldn't get help quick enough. And the next 2 died before the age of 5 of malaria. And again, we couldn't get help quick enough. And I asked the group, I said, well, raise your hand. If you knew Mildred lost 3 of her 5 children, raise your hand. No one raises their hand, which was a little encouraging to me because it reminds me that they have similar problems that we have here. We want to hold those stories in. We want to live in isolation. And I said, raise your hand if you knew that Mildred was living with this disease day in and day out that affects her every single day of her life. Raise your hand. Again, no one raises their hand. And we close in prayer, and we're done. And on that particular day, the van that was supposed to pick us up was tied up somewhere else. And so we made the decision to just walk back to the place where we were staying. It was about a 3 to 5 mile walk back on a dirt road. And you see, on the day I went in the storyline, I would have told you I was riding up here. My confidence was high. I was feeling good about my leadership. And on that walk back, I began to have tears and this awful feeling of thinking, I can't do this. I'm not cut out for this. I'm not a competent leader. You see, I was prepared here for the stories that I would hear, but there's nothing that can really prepare you here for the stories you're about to enter into. And I get back to our lodging where we're staying, and I email Tammy. And I said, man, we talk all the time about storyline and how we redeem negative turns and we do something meaningful with the pain and how this helps us live better stories, more meaningful stories. But the truth is, I don't know what it looks like for them to live better stories, and I don't know what I'm doing. And you see, it's moments like these where you can begin to lose yourself. You lose sense of who you are, and you buy into the narrative of who you're not. And like little Simba, I had a strong urge to run away. Except I knew it wasn't practical. I knew like I was in Africa and I actually had to show up the next day. But in my mind, I could show up and not really show up. You know what I mean? How you can show up but not really be present? And I didn't have to give of myself. I could lead in superficial and inauthentic ways so that I wouldn't be affected by the pain that I was entering into. But you know, also like little Simba, in his act of running, he experienced incredible gifts along the way, gifts that brought him back, that reminded him who he was and brought him back home. Here's some of the gifts I experienced. You know, on that same day, we got back to our lodging, and we were tired. My heart was worn out. and we were looking forward to dinner and going to bed. And right before dinner was served, the clinic calls, where Project Humanity has been doing lots of work. And the Dr. Mark says, hey, you guys said you want to see the birth of a baby. If it's true, you better come now because she is in labor. And so let me try to set the setting for you. I was on one side of the bed. By the way, clinics in Rusinga Island are nothing like our hospitals here, so don't think Skyridge. I was on one side of the bed. Johnny in the picture was on the other side of the bed. My mom was literally one of the catchers. There was a couple other people in the room, and Dr. Mark was leading the process. And I don't know any other way to describe this other than all of the sudden, like without incident, there was new life. A new baby boy had entered into the world. And it was this gift of new life in the midst of pain and suffering and widows and AIDS and malaria and dying. It was this gift of hope in the midst of hopelessness. And we needed that gift. And they named this little baby boy Johnny. He was on the other side of the bed holding the hand of that mother. And the mother was asked, what will his name be? And she looked up. She said, what's your name? He said, Johnny. She says, we'll name him Johnny. You know, on the second to last day in our storyline group, we ended the group by asking them to dream and to dream big. And so your homework is to go home today, and you can either write these dreams, you can think about these dreams, but tomorrow when you come back to the group, you will share with us some of your dreams. But on this day, we ended by reading the story of Joseph from Genesis together. And Joseph, we read, he was this big dreamer. He had big dreams. And when he would walk into the room, his brothers would say, uh-oh, here comes Joseph, the big dreamer. And they were jealous and they were angry. And so they plotted to kill Joseph. Long story short, God had other plans for Joseph, and he raised up to be this great leader in his day. And I reminded the group, as you begin to dream, there will certainly be those voices, those people that come along, and they will tell you, you're not good enough, you can't do this, you're not really worth it. By the way, things in your life will never, ever change. This is just the way it is. And I said, when those voices come along, you have to blow them away. So we got out cans of bubbles. Many of them had never seen bubbles before. And we went to this open space beside the church. And I said, grab a partner and begin to blow bubbles so you can remember to blow the negative away. And we even got the pastor in on this action. And I said, but there's one rule here. Before you blow bubbles, you have to shout out loud as you can. You have to shout, I am loved, I am valued, and I'm worth it. And it was this gift of dozens and dozens of bubbles floating up in the air and hearing these voices shouting, I am loved, I am valued, and I am worth it. It was the gift of these beginning dreams in the midst of such brokenness. By the way, we have 2 tables here today. If after you receive the bread and the cup, if you want to stop by one of these tables to blow away the voices that degrade you, that bring you down, that remind you who you're not rather than who you are, I encourage you to stop by one of the tables and blow some bubbles. It's incredibly healing. And by the way, they're called super miracle bubbles. I got them at Target. Who doesn't want to blow super miracle bubbles? So on the next day, the group comes together. And it was actually quite profound. Many of them had written page after page of their dreams. Zainabu, who was one of the first ones to share, she was a young widow who had these boys, and she talked about the struggle of raising her boys in poverty on her own. She shared And afterwards, I thought, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I got to get out my phone and get this on camera. So I have a 24-second clip. English is not her native language, so bear with the translation, but I think you'll get the gist of it.
As a widow who has the experience, I would like to start a widow center so that I can talk to them, because many of them, when their husbands die, they run away, leaving their children behind, suffering, because they think they cannot make it. When they will be informed, we will not have total orphans, literacy, the women will be doing their businesses, and the community will be developed.
By the way, Senabu is also a small business owner. How cool is that she, because she has experienced the suffering and pain of being a widow, she wants to start a widow center. That's what it looks like to begin redeeming negative turns, doing something meaningful with your pain. And by the way, Mildred, who was also a young widow, mother of 5, already buried 3 of her children, she shared her dreams. You know what she wants to do? Get this. Because she experienced life on the streets as an orphan, she wants to start an orphanage. And when I pushed her, I asked her to dream with us in front of the group. I said, what would it look like? How would you start this? And she stands up, and her eyes are beaming, and her smile is huge. And she says, I would own my own land, and I would build a new home, and I would take in orphans off the street, and I would love them, and I would pray for them. That's what it looks like to begin dreaming about redeeming negative turns. And there's this really beautiful story in Mark's gospel where Jesus is with his disciples, the ones closest to him. And this woman is in the room, and this woman begins to pour out this expensive perfume on Jesus' head, which is actually a first-century Jewish ritual of preparing the body for burial. This is right before Jesus' crucifixion. And the disciples are outraged. They're furious. Jesus, why is she doing this? This is expensive stuff. We could have used this to help the poor. And Jesus says, no. You guys are missing it. This is all she has, and she's doing a beautiful act of service. You are missing it. And the thing I love about Jesus is he always sees what others can't see. He's always looking just below the surface to see what's happening. So as we're getting ready to leave, it's our last day. We had heard the stories. We had heard the dreams. Relationships had formed. Friendships had formed. We were literally walking away. And Molenta, who you see in the picture with her children and my mom in the back. Molenta, she's the one that shared that her husband is an alcoholic, not present. Her home had recently burned down. Greatest dream is that her children might have a bed. And she reaches into her bag and she says, Pastor, I've heard you talk about your wife, Tammy. Please give her this gift. And you look at it and you're thinking, wait a minute, it's just a wooden spoon. We have plenty of wooden spoons in our house. And besides, if we need another wooden spoon, we can run up to King Soopers and get one for 99 cents. I don't need another wooden spoon. But you know as well as I know, this is way more than just a spoon, isn't it? This is way more than just a spoon. You know, when she handed me the spoon, my heart swelled up and I was filled with this joy. And it was like I had reached in my pocket and grabbed out a piece of paper and read it. And it said, the universe was made for you. God was always reminding the people of ancient Israel, the Hebrew people, who they were. And remember who you are, and remember who I am. It's a story in Isaiah 43, and it's tattooed on my arm. It's a story that's close to my heart. And here's how it's recorded in Isaiah chapter 43. I but now, says the Lord, the one who created you, Jacob, the one who formed you, Israel. Don't fear. For I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When through the rivers, they won't sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you won't be scorched, and the flame won't burn you. I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I have given Egypt as your ransom, Cush and Seba in your place, because you are precious in my eyes. You are honored, and I love you. And what a beautiful reminder that is. Like, how often do we need to hear that? Things will happen in life. And when the rivers come, when the waters come, when the fires happen and the flame happens, I am in all of it. And by the way, you are precious in my eyes. You are honored, and I love you. How beautiful of a reminder is that? The gifts were way more than just gifts. The spoon was way more than just a spoon. It was a reminder of who I am and who God created me to be. It's my life theme that I've developed over a year ago through the storyline process. And it's a simple one. It's one sentence: to help others experience God and beauty in their midst, in their mess and brokenness. They remind me who I am. So, what are the things that cause you to run away? And don't stop there in your reflection. What are the things, the gifts that bring you back? The gifts that allow you to remember who you are?